All right. Good morning or good afternoon. Sorry, everyone. Welcome, and we are so sorry to get this started a few minutes late, but we're excited to be here. So thank you so much for joining us for Tipping Point, Connecticut's first affordable housing conference series. My name is Kaylee Pratt. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Partnership for Strong Communities. Throughout the week, the partnership is hosting over 30 sessions featuring local, state, and national experts, leading conversations that explore challenges, share best practices, and coalesce us around critical next steps to address key affordable housing issues in our state. This session is titled Community Leadership and Sponsorship in Creating Affordable Housing Options. If you haven't followed us already, please join the conversation about Tipping Point at hashtag Tipping Point 2020 on Twitter and follow us at PSC Housing. Before we turn it over to our presenters today, we would like to thank our leading sponsors, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and the Melville Charitable Trust. Their deep support has allowed this conference series to exist. And thank you also to our collaborating sponsor, the Connecticut Department of Housing, and our supporting sponsors, Housing Enterprises Incorporated and Whitaker. So we have a few housekeeping items before we turn it on over. This session is being recorded, and we will make all recordings available following the conference. So conference attendees can get that as soon as possible after the conference. All participants have entered muted. So please remain on mute unless a presenter has asked you to unmute yourself. If you have any technology issues, please select the chat icon at the bottom of your screen and send a chat to me at PSC Zoom meetings, and I'll do my best to assist you. And your presenters will let you know how they would like the questions to be asked throughout. It could either be through the chat function or Q&A. A few minutes before the end of the session, we will launch a poll that asks for your feedback on the session. Please take a moment to share and help us improve our future webinars and conference offerings. And lastly, PSC is working to better understand the needs of our communities and affordable housing partners. We want to learn from you, and so towards the end of the session, we will share a link in the chat to a survey. Please take a few minutes to complete this survey and share your feedback to shape the issues that we are addressing. All right, so I'll now turn it on over to our presenters. I think, Carol, are you?
Great, and thanks to everyone for tuning in on a Monday, and happy Thanksgiving in advance to all. Today we're going to try to explore sponsorship and local community leadership on how to develop affordable housing in your hometown or in the communities that you frequent. Gyroscope Development Group, just as an introduction, is a newly formed LLC, and the two principals of it are Carol Martin and Bruce Whitaker. And Bruce Whitaker owns and manages real estate, affordable housing real estate, and his expertise in working with affordable housing operators and housing authorities through the entire state of Connecticut. So he's also been a colleague, a dear friend, and a current business partner to two communities that I have the pleasure of serving, which are Fairfield and Westport down in Fairfield County. I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about our story here in Orange. For full disclosure, I live in the town of Orange and have lived here since 1992. I love my community, and I had continued to drive up and down the Boston Post Road in Orange and noticed that we were losing our mobile trailer park. One by one, they were disappearing. And then as I drove by, I saw a sign up for commercial real estate. And as a resident of Orange, I know my town needs affordable, quality housing and accessible options for people living right in our community, including folks that would like to move to the Orange community. And it was troubling to me that there wasn't a conversation happening about, okay, if we're losing our affordable housing here, where is it in my community we're going to be able to replace it? And like many towns, land is obviously always scarce, and for affordable housing, obviously it's location, location, location. Many of the existing housing options in Orange, probably like your communities, I'm guessing, where you live, primarily are single family homes, and in Orange and certainly many of the areas down in Fairfield County, which I currently work in, those single family homes are relatively high priced. They're certainly not considered starter homes for young folks with looking to start a family with no children. So I decided to reach out to the first selectman, Jim Zioli, and ask him the question about if we couldn't have or continue to have affordable housing on Route 1, where best should we have it? And to my pleasure, and frankly, not to my surprise, my first selectman had already had some thoughts about other areas in Orange where he thought affordable housing would fit in nicely. So myself and Bruce Whitaker, we worked collaboratively with the town, being mindful, obviously, of the zoning regulations, et cetera. And we came up with a proposal that's on screen right now, which is 46 units of affordable housing, 21 one-bedroom units, 21 two-bedroom units, and 4 three-bedroom units. 25 out of the 46 units are barrier-free, which in my mind means fully wheelchair accessible. So if in fact you're renting a home and something happens during your life, or you have a traumatic event that requires accessible housing, the good news is more than half of these units will continue to serve you as they did prior to the event. One of the things that I found refreshing is that town government and elected officials knew that this was a problem, that the town needed this type of housing, but had struggled with trying to find the right partner to help them move it forward. And that's when Gyroscope Development Group, obviously, we stepped in. And we talked a little bit about some of the things that the town was looking to do to meet the need. And then myself and my business partner, Bruce Whitaker, we were able to underwrite the project with having 75% of these units being affordable and 25% being market rate. And I just want to pause for a second, because I know many of you watching understand the state statute 830G. And maybe you live in a community where an affordable housing development has been developed under 830G, and it became very contentious. It may have been in a location that many of the residents of the community thought was a poor location. It may have not looked like the other surrounding housing that was around it. It may have even had many more units on the parcel that made it stand out in character or in proportionality, height, width, and depth of the surrounding community. And so 830G in of itself, in many cases, has always been used under a contentious atmosphere, where developers would come in and develop 30% of the units as affordable, 70% as market rate. And what was driving the number of units on a per acre basis was the fact that the developer obviously was trying to realize a profit during the development. No different, obviously, than any for-profit developer. Gyroscope Development Group, it is certainly on our radar to develop housing that is accepted and frankly makes the community very proud of. It doesn't mean that a for-profit developer doesn't make a profit. It has to be that way only because the next nature of our business would be to replicate this in other communities. But what it does do is signify when there's a private-public partnership in a relationship that all can walk away feeling like they've accomplished something, and the existing community can embrace it and be very proud of the final results. And so really quickly, the apartments will be of obviously market rate quality. There's a middle building, which is a single-story building, which will contain a fitness center, a place for the residents to obviously, if they choose to recreate. We're also very much into green and sustainable building, and therefore this project is being designed to operate and be constructed in accordance with the National Green Building Emerald Standard for efficiency and sustainability. Again, it's something that I believe my community will be really proud of. Proud of the fact that, you know, we've been able to take a location which is currently wooded, which is not even a quarter mile from Route 1 and a bus transit district, but also will give, you know, frankly, our young, very gifted youth that are coming home from college, probably sooner than many of us would want them to, but nonetheless give them the opportunity once they graduate, rather than returning home and living with mom or dad, to be able to return to an affordable rental that would allow them to stay in the town that they were born in, raised in, and love, and also be able to give them the ability to afford the rent and possibly put away some of their income into a savings account for a future home ownership opportunity. Like anything in life, housing is a continuum. The house that we needed when we were 6 years old is terribly different than the house we needed when we were 26. Most likely very different at the house that when we were 66, and certainly at 86. And if communities aren't creating those options, they're actually displacing the families and the human asset and the organicness of their community. They're forcing folks to relocate out of their town. Obviously, I believe that the town of Orange's goal is to, you know, maintain our great sense of community, and that means taking care of folks young, old, disabled. And then with that, I'll just pause for a second and tell you we were able to put together a fabulous development team, and I have the pleasure of introducing our land use attorney, Andrea Gomes, who's with Shipman and Goodwin. She has been fabulous and one of the key communicators and helpful technical expertise she brings to the table during a land use process in the middle of COVID-19. And for those of you that have lived through COVID-19 and all of the good work our governor has done, we've probably seen 10 executive orders specifically designed for public meetings. And so she really did a great job at keeping up with all those executive orders. So without further ado, please let me introduce Andrea Gomes.
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Andrea Gomes. I'm an attorney at Shipman and Goodwin in Hartford. Thank you for spending your Monday lunch with us. The Partnership for Strong Communities has put together an incredible conference series this week, and I'm honored to be a small part of it. So Carol and Bruce asked me to speak for a bit today about the land use approval process for Lascana Homes, which, needless to say, was a bit different than we initially expected it to be in light of COVID-19. I will note initially that Carol and Bruce did an incredible amount of legwork before we were contacted, assembling a team of consultants, vetting the site, coordinating with town officials and staff, conducting community outreach, and a flurry of other things, so that our job was relatively easy to jump into on the approval side of things. Make no mistake though, even with all of that legwork, this approval process for this community was multifaceted. On March 4th of this year, which seems like a million years ago, we filed an application with the Board of Selectmen to discontinue approximately half an acre of unused town road that would be used as the driveway for the community eventually. 2 months later, on May 4th, we filed an application for a wetlands permit. And then finally, on July 2nd, 2020, we filed a 3-part application with the Plan and Zoning Commission in Orange to amend the zoning regulations to include what would eventually become the assisted housing district, for a map amendment to rezone this 4.7 acre site to the assisted housing district, and then for site plan approval for the proposed community to meet the requirements of the assisted housing district. So this 3-part application format is a format we typically used for assisted housing communities proposed under General Statutes 830G, Connecticut's Affordable Housing Land Use Appeals Act. The approach is time tested. It's been successfully used in more than 70 comparable communities across Connecticut over the past 30 years. And in short, 830G developments need a combination of site-specific use and dimension requirements plus affordability rules, which aren't typically found in existing zoning regulations. So by drafting our own site-specific regulation and rezoning that site to the new zone, we're guaranteeing that an 830G community is approved as a conforming use, eliminating the need for variances. That's important for several reasons, one of them being financing, for example, but it also makes it easier for the town to monitor and enforce that approval if necessary. While seemingly easily summarized in only 3 parts, our zoning application included a lot of additional information on traffic, stormwater, and even a phase 1 environmental assessment of the site, not to mention the very detailed plans and architectural elevations we submitted. So it was no easy feat putting this all together, particularly doing so virtually. The list of applications I just submitted, or I just mentioned, doesn't even include the meetings that we had with the Traffic Authority, the Water Pollution Control Authority, and the Fire Marshal to eventually get us to our approval. So with everything that typically goes into assembling and submitting these applications, responding to town comments, conducting the presentation at the public hearing, we had, as many, if not all applicants had this year, the added complication of learning how to do all of this in the midst of a pandemic. As we all know, COVID-19 halted all operations for many towns for at least some time period. Meetings were canceled, applications were put on hold to allow municipalities to figure out how to conduct business during a pandemic in a world where no one could actually meet in person. Eventually, however, as Carol mentioned, executive orders came to the rescue, if you will. So many municipalities were able to shift to a virtual platform like a WebEx or a Zoom. And the shift to the virtual world was, of course, thanks to Governor Lamont's executive orders 7B and 7I, which provided municipal commissions with the authority to conduct public meetings virtually during the state of emergency as a result of COVID-19. Executive orders also modified various public notice requirements, including, for example, allowing the notification of the public hearing to be posted on the town's website. And it extended various deadlines, such as the statutory deadlines for opening and concluding a public hearing, in recognition that during the pandemic, things were taking longer than they otherwise would have, especially at the beginning as everyone was trying to find their virtual sea legs, if you will. Thankfully, the town of Orange was able to move their municipal meetings to an online platform, which we obviously took advantage of this year. And just as municipalities like Orange were learning how to conduct virtual meetings, we too, on the applicant side, were learning how to participate in them as an applicant. So after I got used to the idea of conducting a public hearing presentation at home, sometimes with a dog whining in the background, sorry, Carol, Bruce, the biggest adjustment our team had to make was figuring out how to present this multi-part affordable housing application in an effective and clear manner virtually, while staying on top of all of the new administrative requirements that were coming with virtual hearings. We were fortunate enough here, I think Carol alluded to this, to be working with terrific town staff members, Jack Demersion and Tammy Trentalis, who were more than willing to work with us in drafting and posting the legal notice, filing the required documents with the town clerk for the map and text amendment, posting application materials online, and answering our endless questions throughout the approval process, among other things. It was quite a bit of work, I think, on both sides, but I think ultimately it paid off. And of course, we were also fortunate enough to have a great team of consultants who were not only technically precise, but were willing to work with us in nailing down the specifics of our presentation, including, for example, who was going to screen share and advance our slides and when. Simple things like that made all the difference, I think, in the end. In doing that, our presentation eventually ran as smooth to the Plan and Zoning Commission, ran as smoothly as we think it could have remotely. Thankfully, again, all of this work up front paid off, and we secured our zoning approval among all the other approvals, but the zoning approval on September 1st of this year. In approving our application, the Commission applauded Gyroscope for its work, including in particular its outreach efforts with the neighbors and its presentation during the public hearing, as well as communication and involving town staff and officials. And happily, the Commission also reiterated its commitment to promoting affordable housing in Orange and commented how Gyroscope's proposal was getting them closer to meeting that goal, which was truly a great thing to hear. With that, I'll leave you with just a few takeaways or lessons that we learned through this process, which certainly applies to affordable housing applications, but some of which I think can apply to any application before a municipal commission. First, I'll note work hand in hand with town staff in meeting notice requirements like developing the public hearing notice and posting materials online in advance of the public hearing so that you don't open yourselves up to a defective notice argument if someone appeals the commission's decision. Work with town staff on what I'll call the technical matters, meaning ensure that all of the details of the virtual meeting are ironed out in advance, since each municipality is doing it a bit differently and using different platforms. Questions like whether your team will have screen sharing capabilities and how public comments will be received are helpful to ask in advance so there are no surprises during the public hearing. Also, work with your own team in advance to iron out these issues. Develop a hearing outline so there are no awkward transitions. Designate a point person to field questions during the meeting to the appropriate team member, and establish how you'll circulate internal questions or comments throughout the meeting. One of the downsides to a virtual meeting is losing the opportunity to simply lean over to one of your team members to ask them to expand upon a point or to give them a thought. That can still happen virtually, just don't use the chat function in the Zoom or the WebEx. Set up another means in advance. I think for Gyroscope, we set up a group email chain should we had any comments to share during the public hearing internally. And lastly, and I know Carol and Bruce and I discussed this in particular, work as a team to determine what the applicant can actually build or do with this proposal. And again, what I mean by that is you lose the opportunity to just lean over and ask the applicant certain questions when certain comments or proposed conditions come up during the public hearing. And there may be a tendency for an applicant or part of its team to represent that it can accept particular conditions of approval or changes to their plans just to get the approval. But the applicant should know in advance, and the team member should know or try and anticipate what changes are actually feasible. Changes to a development plan should not just happen in a vacuum, even if you're in a virtual setting. So with that, I thank you all for allowing me a few minutes to share my land use perspective of this incredible development. I was very proud to be part of the team. And I will hand it back over, I think, to Taylor this time.
Thank you, Andrea. And Taylor, I know you're driving, so thank you for that. You know, we talked about, and the topic, obviously, of this particular session is really about local communities being the sponsors of creating affordable housing opportunities in their own communities. And I'm very proud to say that the volunteers that sit, at least on my local planning and zoning board commission, are wonderful, and certainly very much a sponsor and a partner into moving this project through the land use period. And I thought we would share a small video clip of the actual deliberation of these volunteers. Thank you, Taylor.
So we're at a point now where we can discuss the application and ultimately, hopefully, time put it to a vote. Who would like to begin our discussion? Judy, Evan, Paul?
I'll be happy to. I was impressed with the entire application from Carol, who I had not seen before. I thought it was well thought out. To the presenters themselves, I was very impressed with the application. That being said, the actual construction I thought was also well thought out. Moving the site, not the sight lines, but the fences back to accommodate the neighbors, speaking with the neighbors, trying to address their concerns, I thought was also very well done. I thought that the layout, having no common hallways and you go right into your unit, was something that was also very interesting to me. I thought they did a nice job with that. And then finally, I think it's harmonious with what we need in terms of we need some affordable housing. I think this fits right in with that. I thought they did a very nice job.
Thank you, Paul. Kevin?
Well, I had two basic comments. One is to understand the regulatory framework that our decision-making process is occurring under. With this application coming in under 830G, the scope of our review is, basically limited, to put it on a bumper sticker, to public health and safety, which basically boils down to, traffic and sanitary, type matters. And we're dealing with these issues on any properties that border West Haven. The Post Road as retail continues to decline along there. And for an 830G application to come in and be of this quality and to deliver such a well thought out product in a thoughtful way is really all you can ask for in a commission, so that was it.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin.
It clearly meets our comprehensive plan of development goal of, providing a diversity of housing stock. And in this project, I believe the affordability percentage was around 70. So clearly, and that's very impressive, and it does get us closer to our goal of 10%. I know Carol Martin for years, and we could not have a better management team. This is almost in her backyard. So I'm very confident that this project will be developed properly and maintained properly, and it'll be a project I think we can all be proud of.
I think it was very nicely done. I think Attorney Gomes did a very professional job. Developers, Ms. Barton and Mr. Whitaker, were professional and accommodating, and the design team as well. But they did a very nice job.
Right. I agree with all those comments. I think it's a great opportunity for the town. I think Judy touched on, I think we need to make findings on consistency of the application with our plan of conservation and development. And I think she's touched on the primary one, and that is, providing a diversity of housing opportunities, particularly as it relates to an aging population in Orange.
If you wouldn't mind, Ozzy, I apologize for the interruption. I'm looking at the POCD now, and I'm looking on page 73. And providing housing in Orange, which is more affordable, will allow us to, like you said, address the housing needs of an aging population, which we all know in Orange is most of the population. Provide housing choices for existing residents so that they do not have to move elsewhere if their circumstances change. Offer more housing choices for younger people, more housing choices for single people, and more housing choices for moderate income people who live in Orange. Just to throw that out there, because for the POCD, I feel like that was very relevant.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah,
Mhm.
and you know, we're also committed to reaching our goal of reaching the goal established by the state of Connecticut of having 10% of our housing stock affordable. And as Judy mentioned, this gets us significant, if not all the way there, a significant part of the way there. So I certainly, I saw nothing in the plan of conservation and development that I would describe as being, this project would be antithetical to it. So clearly, I'm very comfortable in an approval of the application in terms of its consistency with our plan of conservation and development. But overall, I think it's a great project. And yes, the applicant's team the applicant and his and her team did a great job with it. It's, you know, one of those applicants sort of reminiscent of the UI proposal, you know, it was just so very well done that, you know, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot for us to say. But yes, a very well put together application. So I would favor an approval. Hearing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And it looks like it's unanimous, Tammy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, congratulations. That's very exciting, and I think it'll be a great project.
Thanks, Taylor. And with that said, I had the pleasure to actually interview our first selectman, Jim Zioli. And this was the gentleman that Gyroscope, myself and Bruce had a conversation with. So this is really the inception of myself being disappointed about our loss of our mobile trailers and what the town could do to, you know, find alternate locations for quality affordable housing. Thank you, Taylor.
So what is important that there's affordable housing in communities like the town of Orange?
It's so important that the other residents that are already living in the town need to understand the need for this type of housing. They have sons and daughters, mothers, fathers, aunts and uncles, friends that may have been divorced, and they need to understand that not everybody wants to live in the 4-bedroom colonial with the 2-car garage and the golden retriever out front. There are varied needs for people, and Orange recognizes that. And in connecting to build this project, we are just so excited that we'll be able to offer opportunity to people that otherwise might not have been able or ready to step up to purchasing their first home in town, yet they'll be part of the community, welcome into the community. And it's a project that fills so many needs, from first floor units that are handicapped accessible, whether you're not everybody who's handicapped is a senior. People forget that. We have veterans, we have other people with disabilities, not just seniors that will benefit from first floor handicapped accessible units. The second and third floor loft type units will benefit young families, young couples that haven't started a family yet or are ready to, not ready to buy a house yet. Young and single professional individuals that want to have a place of their own. They don't want to live in mom and dad's basement. And yet this is an affordable way for them to make that next step in life. And it's just so exciting. And it is better to control the type of housing you get and make it appropriate and what you feel fits your community, as opposed to having a developer come to you and tell you, we'll either take it or we take you to court. That's not how a community should operate.
What are some of your thoughts on how each community's elected officials can promote the creation of affordable housing units which meets the needs of the community?
Well, it's so important that each town plans their own destiny. And this is part of that. And leadership can't be afraid of saying, we're looking at an affordable housing project. You need to embrace that and know that it will appropriately fit into an appropriate area where those residents that choose to move there feel as much a part of that community as those that have lived here 20, 30, 50 years. When we met, you were looking at a location right on Route 1, high traffic, truck traffic and all. I didn't feel it was an appropriate location because of that, not because I didn't want to lose land on the post road. You're going to have families, handicapped, disabled of different sorts, young people. We found a location that we were directing that offers community life off the beaten path, yet still offers transit, shopping, utilities, all services that have to go with a high density project. You can't put a high density affordable project in the middle of a suburban neighborhood that still is on septic systems. You have to have sewers, so you need to plan this to areas that are not overly developed in the commercial industrial zones, but you have to have that accessibility to make these projects work. Orange, we understand that, and we're welcoming projects like this.
Thanks, Taylor. And so I wanted to give folks that were participating in this session the ability to know that it's not just obviously happening in the town of Orange. I have the pleasure of working in Westport, Connecticut. I've been working there now for 15, 16 years. And there's other communities that are embracing taking the lead and creating, again, public-private partnerships where the town is actually sponsoring opportunities to create affordable units in town. Currently, the chairwoman of the Planning and Zoning Commission in Westport is one of those individuals. Her name is Danielle Dobin, and I actually had the pleasure to interview her and ask her some very pointed questions about how she's doing, how she's creating affordable housing opportunities in Westport.
Please tell me why you've been such an affordable housing advocate as chairwoman of the local Planning and Zoning Commission.
Well, there's a few important reasons for any elected planning and zoning commissioner to care about affordable housing. First, there's the moral issue. There is an intractable seeming opportunity gap that exists in Connecticut, where the opportunities for a child seem to relate directly to where that child is born and raised. And one of the ways that those of us in high opportunity towns like Westport can make a difference is by creating more opportunities for people who can't otherwise live in Westport to have the opportunity to live here. That's number one. Number two, in the state of Connecticut, there's actually a legal and regulatory requirement that towns create a certain amount of affordable housing if they're not compliant with state statute 830G. Westport isn't compliant with statute. And I think a far better approach than looking for outside developers to come in utilizing 830G to bypass our local regulations is to craft and work within our local regulations to create mixed income, multifamily housing that creates an alternative to really expensive single family homes, but also really works for our neighborhoods and our communities.
How can local P&Z members be catalysts for increasing the number of affordable units in their communities?
830G is flawed. It's flawed partially because the legislators that drafted it, I think, didn't appreciate that it acts much more like a club than a scalpel. So local P&Zs can be a lot more effective if they look at crafting their own regulations that incentivize affordable housing, like the IHC overlay zone in Westport, which provides a density bump for applicants who include 20% on-site affordable, but are still designed that the resulting building and project is designed so that it fits with the aesthetics of town in terms of height, density, and respecting setbacks. 830G, unfortunately, allows developers to bypass local regulations And because those applicants are attempting to include 30% on-site affordable and also make their money back in spades because these are for-profit developments, the result is that 830G applications are often oversized. They're not just substantially taller than what's typically found in a community, they're also much larger, and that creates a lot of infrastructure issues for towns and also creates fire and police concerns. On the other hand, if towns look to create their own areas or districts where they incentivize mixed income multifamily, they can create projects that make sense for specific neighborhoods. And neighbors will actually show up, as we've had multiple times with projects in our IHC overlay zone, come in and speak affirmatively in favor of the redevelopment of the site instead of in opposition to it. I also think that 830G doesn't do a great job of making use of our amazing local housing authorities in the state of Connecticut. The difference between developing via a housing authority versus a traditional for-profit developer is the profit. 70% or 80% affordable as compared to 30% makes all the difference. I think that local P&Zs, number one, should look at creating their own incentives to create the type of housing they want to see created in their towns. And number two, should work really closely with their housing authority, because the housing authority would be a terrific partner. In fact, the Westport Planning and Zoning Commission is working hand in hand with our Westport Housing Authority, led by Carol Martin, to try to create a all-new affordable neighborhood in central Westport. And this would have been impossible to try to achieve with a for-profit developer.
Based on your experience in Westport, why is it important to have more housing options for families who earn less than 80% of the area median income?
I'm so glad you asked that question. The reason it's so critical for local planning and zoning commissions and leadership, whether it's the Board of Selectmen or a mayor, to be focused on creating opportunities for families who earn less than 80% of the state median income or the area median income, is simply because if we're not focused on creating those opportunities, they will not exist. There are so many people grown up in Westport who don't have the means to move back here after they graduate from college. There are so many people who live in Westport right now, but if they go through a life change, divorce, a change in their employment, or simply as they age, they can't afford to stay in Westport. And a really strong community wants to create opportunities for people, even as their life circumstances change. It's also, I think, critical to note that a thriving community has a diversity of people living there. We don't want to have a community with all of our teachers and our firefighters or our town employees have to live 40 minutes away from where they work in Westport. Instead, I prefer to see a community where we have opportunities for people to different income levels to live here. That doesn't mean that we can't preserve a predominantly single-family zoning. I believe that we can. And I think it's really local planning and zoning commissions that are best suited to look at increasing opportunities to diversify housing for a variety of people, and at the same time, sustain whatever the community character looks like. And those two goals don't have to be mutually exclusive. And here in Westport, over the last several years, to an exponentially larger number of mixed income, multifamily projects, and over, I would say, the last 2 decades, all of them, for the most part, without any restriction, not being restricted as to who can live there. And that's made such a tremendous difference. Now, life circumstances change, and of course, you no longer have to go to this house to find options here in Westport. And it's incumbent, I think, on all communities, commissions statewide to take a look at what they can do within their regs. And there are so many different creative solutions to find out.
Thanks, Taylor. And I apologize. I know we're having some audio video streaming delays. So my apologies to everyone, participating this afternoon. The last interview I had, and this sort of gets to the racial imbalances that we are seeing across the state of Connecticut. obviously very well documented. And at the core, obviously, of much of the racial inequities is the fact that, you know, housing certainly in Fairfield County is very expensive. And, you know, moderate and lower income families are just unable to find housing, whether it's rental or home ownership opportunities. It's also true, obviously, throughout the state, but I think the greatest disparity, obviously, is in Fairfield County. Team Westport was created back in 2003, and it's a full official town committee in Westport. And TEAM stands for Together Effectively Achieving Multiculturalism. And Harold Bailey is the chairman of this committee. And I had the pleasure to sit down with him to talk about the nexus between our racial imbalances in our communities and affordable housing.
Why it's important that there's affordable housing in communities with good public school systems.
Sure. Let's back up a little bit there. If we're talking about housing with, quote, good school systems, they tend to be communities that are pretty affluent, number one. Number two, they tend to be communities that are white at a percentage that's higher than the Connecticut average, significantly higher. So generally, we're talking about the mid-90s in terms of whiteness of the community. I had recently ran across a term called zip code apartheid. And in effect, what we have in Connecticut are affluent communities dotted around urban areas like Bridgeport, or even in Norwalk in some cases, that have school systems that are wildly different in terms of community. But what happens if you're in one of those affluent communities is there's a kind of a bubble mentality that exists. And it's a bubble mentality for adults, but also for the children. From the perspective, let's start with the children. The children look around and what they see are people that look like them, and the main, that's white kids. They look at who's the best in terms of leadership, it's all white. They look at what the best school is, and they're told you're in one of the best schools in the state, and everybody there is white, including the administrators, the teachers, and everybody else around. The people of color in the school are going to be generally people working in the cafeterias, people who are doing janitorial work, and so on. And so, even though everybody there says, "Hey, look, I'm completely free of racism. I don't care what color you are, whether you're white, purple, whatever. Everything's fine." When the kids are growing up, ultimately, what they're going to say is, "But all the best people look like me. All the best people in leadership are like me." And then you get what's going on with adults, which is what kids ask, what about the people that live in those urban areas who don't have houses that are as nice, and school systems that are as good? Why is that? And we get memes like, well, they don't work as hard. They're not as smart as we are because our systems are better. They don't have the connections and the understanding about the way things work. What are you going to come out with? You're going to come out with kids who think, in effect, this is what's best. And yeah, I mean, I'm not biased or anything, but the reality is we're better because we work harder, smarter, we're better educated than anybody else. We really need to have affordable housing. Some people go, well. So what you're saying is it's only people who are poor or people who need affordable housing that are going to move into this community. And so what you're saying is let's bring in a bunch of poor black people or poor people of color. No, what we're saying is you do need to have that, and it is going to benefit everybody in town. But once you start to do that and you start to get an attitude in town that has respect for people of different races and different cultures, you're going to have affluent who will want to move to the community as well. Because one of the problems, one of the reasons that people aren't going to move there who have money to do so is they're going to look at who's, I don't see anybody who looks like me. I don't see anybody I'm going to be comfortable with socially. I don't see anybody who's going to be a role model for my children. So why the heck should I move there? It helps. It just helps overall, period. And then ultimately, that idea that people, therefore, who are affluent or of color will feel comfortable considering this community now to move into, which is going to help. The whole thing is, affordable housing is critical.
Recently, there's been some conversation, some movement by some town residents in Westport, and leaders are exploring why Westport is so white. The results of that conversation and some of the students that appeared, it is important to have diversity of students in regards to income, race, and ethnicity. I didn't know if you wanted to comment a little bit on some of the Staples High School residents that appeared that evening. They were terrific.
One of the things that popped up, Team Westport has a team diversity essay, and a number of people may have heard about us back in 2017. We basically give a subject that we ask 9th through 12th graders to apply their brains to in 1,000 words or less. And we say, tell us about an issue like, and in 2017 it was white privilege. What do you think about white privilege? Does it exist? Doesn't it exist? So that blew up as a national story because here's this affluent white community having kids comment on white privilege. But from that essay, as well as follow-on essays, which included the subject of microaggression, taking a knee, believe it or not, and then stereotypes, we ended up with some phenomenal essays that won, that all described student environment at the high school, middle school, and throughout the whole system, that had some really troubling toxicity to it. That's one of the things that came out of it, that why it's so white. Another thing that came out of it gets down to what I talk about is expanding the narrative. And that is, part of the problem is when we sit down and talk about race or ethnicity or different religious systems, we're talking past each other. And that's because we don't have a common set of knowledge about our own histories. It's not to go back and denigrate, because let's get some understanding that that's where we started. Let's look at how that progressed over time. And then look at the redlining that took place later on that actually, where the government actually enforced a lack of diversity. They absolutely demanded that if there's a black person inside of a development, we're not going to fund it. It's the federal government. Oh my goodness, we have that happen for generations. You're going to end up with the bubbles and the zip code part of it. Now you say, oh, okay, now I understand how we got here. Now let's talk together about what we do. Actually address it, engage, and then we're empowered to go forward to change policies. With a common understanding of what's been done. That's real.
Thanks, Carol.
Sure.
The elementary schools here in Westport have a higher percentage of non-white students than the actual high school.
Yes.
What do you think may be contributing to some of that demographic shift?
There is no question that in this town, if you take a look, as you just said, I think the number's about 85, Texas Staples is about 85% white students. The middle schools are about 80%. And the elementary schools are somewhere around 76, 77%. So more and more diversity coming into town. What's driven some of that? One of the things that's clearly driven it is affordable housing. All of a sudden, I'll never forget, I was on the Post Road, the bus stop, and another one of the affordable housing areas close to the Stop and Shop. And all of a sudden, all these kids of color, my God, when did this happen? What's going on? Because it's so rare a difference in town. These did. And so it's number one, that helped drive some things. But it's important that it's helped drive those things kind of in the way that we talked about before. Change the character of the town and to get the town to start to realize it makes a difference. And even on Team Westport now, we have parents from affordable housing areas who are coming in to work on some of our parents' cases. Somebody gets fit back into the school system. So part of it is to get the administrators to look at that difference, start to understand how to check unconscious bias inside of themselves, and to look at disparities that are systematic in the system that wholly unintentionally may have driven this kind of disparity. So that's what's happening with the school system, and a lot of it again is driven by the fact that all of a sudden these kids are here, and you've got to deal with it. And they're not kids from somewhere else; they're kids from Westport.
Great. And I know there's a lot of folks out there, I'm sure, that are going to have questions. But was there anything else that you would like to add to our viewers this afternoon that not necessarily words of wisdom, but how you've been able to move this conversation so successfully forward here in Westport?
Well, I think one of the things that we've been fortunate in having in the last 5 or 6 years, because we've been at this for 17 years, and we've gone through ups and downs, and interests and no interests. I'd say certainly in the last 5 years, has been tremendous amount of interest. And sitting around the table and having all the leaders of the major organizations in town, at least once a month, sit around that table with initiatives. They don't just come in and say, hey, let's just chat. It's everybody's got initiatives that they're carrying out. And those initiatives, frankly, are anti-racism initiatives. And I do want to put that word out here because there's a lot of people afraid of anti-racism. And it's even been attacked at the national level. Some kind of terrorist plot. It's insane. Anti-racism is strictly the proactive dismantling of policies that cause racial inequity. That's it. It's proactive. It's not, I'm in the center, I don't care one way or the other. I don't care one way or the other, then you're going along with white supremacy and racism. If I don't see color, I'm seeing normal is white and this other stuff, if I'm black, that's a different thing. So you've got to look at proactively going on. We've been fortunate. Have been excited about doing that. We had Abram Kennedy here 2 years ago before lectured, and then we got back to train some of the major leaders of town. And whether it's the clergy, the police, school system, the playhouse, the library, those principles have been put in place to start to have diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies in each one of those organizations. That's what we sit on. So we trade notes on a monthly basis. We work together on projects, and it's really made a tremendous difference.
Thanks, Taylor. And I know we're about a minute over, so I just really wanted to thank the Partnership for Strong Communities and everyone that participated in this session. Obviously, it's a topic near and dear to Gyroscope and our team's hearts. And obviously, I don't think we have time for questions and answers, but happy through email or through the partnership to answer all questions that were submitted during the session. Everyone stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks so much.